Tabletop role-playing games are designed to make you feel emotions. The problem is that none of them are very clear about how to go about it. Today I want to talk to you about some of the emotions that come up, why, and what they can be used for. Hi everyone, I'm Joe, also known as Arcandio, the perpetually pedantic and overly opinionated DM, and this is Joe's Table. So to illuminate ourselves, let's talk about some of the most important emotions of tabletop role-playing games. Before I go into these, keep in mind that this is not a complete list. As emotional and complex as RPGs are, there's no way I can possibly catalog all the emotions I felt in a single session, let alone all that are possible. I'm going to try to stick to the ones that I think are frequent, important, and useful to the discussion. I'm going to start with the ones that are usually negative and work my way towards the positive end of the spectrum. One other note before we get into it, I'm not going to get into the division between the player and the character here. That'll have to be a separate video entirely. I'll try to split the discussion between what the players feel and what the characters feel when there are important distinctions to be made, but probably not for every emotion, because a lot of the time, the character feels what the player feels. Frustration is a good place to start off. Players get frustrated when their plans are thwarted, when they're stopped, stymied, or overwhelmed. A little frustration can be the spark that sets the players off on some new tack, or possibly sends them on a less frustrating but more dangerous route. But a little frustration goes a long way in an RPG. It's real easy to make players too frustrated, which can lead to definite long-term problems for the game. Anger is up next and can arise when players are frustrated too often. It can also come up when someone at the table stumbles on a hot-button topic or makes some other grievous error of the social contract. Anger in the characters is useful because it drives the characters and the players to go on the offensive and become proactive. Anger in the players is pretty much never good. It can disrupt the game, lead to awkwardness in relationships, or even destroy friendships, so be careful with that. Boredom is less dangerous than frustration for the game. Players get bored when they don't have much to do, or when the thing that they're doing is repetitive. Characters grow bored of the same things, but often gameplay naturally glosses over the things that the characters find boring, even though it might not gloss over the things that the players find boring. There aren't a lot of good use cases for boredom at the table unless you're just briefly describing how boring something is. You want to keep the game itself far away from boredom. Up next is disgust, another emotion that's good in characters and not great in players. Player disgust can be fickle to summon, but you often don't want to unless your table already knows that some disgusting stuff is in the cards for the game. Throwing something disgusting in on unsuspecting players can be a game killer. You don't want to throw a gory murder scene in the middle of a session of Golden Sky stories, for example. Conversely, you might find that the characters have almost unrealistically strong stomachs, owing to the conceit of many RPGs as being combat-focused stories. Getting a player to roleplay their character as disgusted when they are not personally is often pretty hard unless they have some specific personality quirk, but ultimately, it's not that useful to you as the GM outside of horror games. Anxiety. Phew, this should be fun. Anxiety comes up when the unexpected is expected. When you don't know what's going to happen, but it could be or will be bad. For players, anxiety is a real bummer. It can mean that instead of looking forward to the game, they're dreading bad things happening either in the story, such as another character death, or around the table, like having to sit somewhere uncomfortable. Like disgust, anxiety is rare in characters. Heroes are rarely racked with anxiety after all. People don't seem to want to roleplay something that they can have for free on the buffet line of daily life. Conversely, some anxious characters can be endearing precisely because we can identify with them so easily. Just don't overdo it. Sadness is a complex one. A lot of the time that it comes up, it's because of loss. If that loss is an item, it can be a bummer. If it's a beloved NPC, it can be a tragedy. If it's a player character, it can be one of the hardest things you can put your game through. Sadness can be cathartic for players, but sometimes it hits a little too close to home, and it's very swingy. Riot Games would have rebalanced it in a heartbeat. Enough downers. How about fun? To be overly specific, I think that a lot of the time that we're gathered around the table, we're not actually having fun per se, or even trying to have fun. We're riding this roller coaster of emotions. Sometimes fun comes up because we're winning, beating a challenge, or doing something else awesome. Sometimes fun comes up because we're sharing a joke and laughing until we're crying. You might say that overall you had fun because you enjoyed the session as a whole, even if the majority of the session was a pain in the ass. That's easier to pull off as a GM if you can make sure that the characters are the ones feeling the negative emotions, while the players are sharing in the positive ones. Easier said than done, I know. Excitement comes from confronting the unknown. Not just experiencing it, but confronting it, taking it on. It can also come from randomized outcomes like loot or even random encounters. Excitement is highly valued by players, and it can be kind of rare if you're not really pushing to keep the game fresh and moving forward. This is part of why rolling for random treasure, even though it might not be the best for the story, is so much damn fun. Immersion is a tough one to describe, but you know it if you hit the end of a session and it seems like it's only been a few minutes. Contrary to what a lot of people seem to think, running a game with extreme historical accuracy does not lead to immersion. Immersion comes from engaging the minds of the players, usually through high-stakes situations like combat, social conflict, or other risky challenges. On the other hand, you can definitely break the immersion by stopping the game to look up rules, fix technical issues, or add elements that aren't internally consistent with the game world or fiction. And lastly, intensity comes from attacks on the things the players value, like when it turns out that the big bad evil guy is targeting someone that they like specifically rather than someplace generally, or when a core backstory element like somebody's religion becomes the sudden focus of some kind of danger. Intensity is the "this shit got real" moment, and it has positive effects on immersion and excitement. Handled poorly, it can lead to anxiety, and handled extremely poorly, it can lead to frustration. That said, it's tough to keep the intensity going all the time, so don't focus on it to the exclusion of other emotions. So there they are, some of the most important emotions in tabletop role-playing games: frustration, anger, boredom, disgust, anxiety, sadness, fun, excitement, immersion, and intensity. Immersion and intensity. Now, full disclosure,
what about fear? Wait.
I can't believe I almost forgot fear. This one's sort of complex and subtle. First off, you don't want any of your players afraid to come to the game. Full stop. Do whatever you have to do to make sure your players are comfortable playing. That said, fear in the characters is potent. Not a lot will make the characters afraid because, as we discussed, they're heroes and we're likely to roleplay them as being quite a bit more brash than they might otherwise realistically be. On the other hand, when the players play their characters with appreciable amounts of fear, you can very easily run into the problem of stubborn, evasive, passive characters who don't want to pursue the adventure. Show them the shadow of a dragon and they might just bag it and go for some side quests in order to level up, even if you've got a plan to keep them reasonably safe. If you threaten them with Strahd's dinner, you better expect that the smart ones are going to clear their entire bucket list before going into the perceived death trap. Let me get my soapbox out here for a sec. This is fine. Don't railroad your players. If they want to get more prepared, give them something interesting they can do in order to prepare for the upcoming threat. Not busy work. Something exciting and active. You should be excited that they're taking the game seriously enough to literally go out of their way to figure out a better way of attacking the problem. This is your moment to let them set up a scheme, prepare backups, or otherwise outfox the problem. Personally, these are some of my favorite kinds of approaches to challenges, both as a player and as a dungeon master. You can take some of the sting out of character fear just by being a friendly DM. You don't have to be overly generous, just clear and considerate enough that your players feel like you're not out to massacre the entire party for no reason. Other than that, sometimes you can overcome fear with what's called a sadist's choice. Either they take on the big bad thing right now, or they risk something bad happening instead, either to the NPCs or to themselves. But let me be perfectly clear. You cannot do this without telegraphing it. The moment you punish them for not bending to the plot hook, they're going to feel betrayed, and that would take us back to anger, which we really don't want. But fear isn't all bad. Fear usually has the precondition of immersion, so if you manage to generate some, do not let it go lightly. When you spot some fear, play around with it, linger in it carefully, if you can do so without slowing the game down. That'll go a long way to reinforcing the immersion. And now, back to the rest of the video. Full disclosure, I don't design my campaigns or sessions around these emotions, and I don't know anyone who does. I don't consider them tools exactly, but rather the outcome of good session design. I personally don't find that I think about these things when I'm working on combat scenarios, only when I'm designing story elements. I don't find myself considering what might make the PCs angry when I build an encounter, for example, but I probably should. This video is more of a catalog of outcomes that I've seen and experienced in order to try to analyze them. Hopefully it's useful to you and to me. I'm game designer Joe Bush. I make tabletop RPGs you can find on voidspiral.com and fantasy art that you can find on arcandio.com. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and all that, and I will see you all in the next session.